Good morning, everyone. What a special day it is today. Being here at this location. Don't you like the vibe here? I just like the vibe here at the Impact Hub. I'm Susan Rodriguez, and I'm one of the, organizers of the Business Leaders Consortium. And we have gone through kind of an evolution of our meetings where we've been talking about internally giving business advice and how to form corporations and the challenges that businesses go through, to inviting business leaders to share their personal stories. And we found that we've gone panels and business leaders such as Henry Dubroff from the Pacific Coast Business Times, and we found that's been such a great way to learn from people's experience. So today it's my great pleasure to introduce Henry Dubroff. Now you guys all have a Pacific Coast Business Times on your chair, and there's more at the table. Henry came from Denver. He went to Columbia University and brought his business experience here to Santa Barbara in 2000 and started the Pacific Coast Business Times. And shortly after coming here, I remember meeting Henry for the first time. And today's a special day because it's also, tonight is the top 50 women in business. So I hope you're going to be there. It's at Decker's at 5:30. So I'm going to do a little plug for that.
Do you know something about that, Susan?
Yeah, yeah, I do. So anyway, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend Henry. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Well, I ordered some sunshine this morning, so that worked out after a little gentle rain last night. And I'm really pleased to be here. I'm going to try and do this without notes, and we'll see how that goes. Certainly, among journalists, there's kind of a tradition of not talking with PowerPoints because most of us are sort of anti-authoritarian figures, and we understand the minute the PowerPoint goes up, unless you're going to be graded or paid for the answers, you immediately go to your iPhone and check your email. So no PowerPoints today. The other thing I would say is that it has been an interesting time for us in publishing. My background is really in news, and I kind of became an accidental business person when some people offered me a little bit of angel capital to start the Business Times. So I've learned most of what I know about running a business just from all of you. And I must say the lessons I've learned from bankers, insurance folks, the many attorneys that we employ have been incredibly valuable. I would also say that the business scene has changed quite a bit, and the kind of theme of my talk is going to be about the changing landscape in business over the last 17, 18 years. And I want to focus on just two areas, mainly banking, financial services, and then technology. But I would like to talk just for a second or two about the Business Times. So we have the largest financial news team between Los Angeles and the Bay Area. When I started the company, the Ventura County Star, and the San Luis Obispo Tribune, even the Santa Barbara News Press had business editors, they had business news staffs. Those are all largely gone, and our team of five and a half in news is the largest team. And what we've also found is that in our kind of top-down world, yes, the Los Angeles Times or the LA Daily News, I mean, they're basically covering two companies north of the Santa Monicas. They're covering Disney and Amgen, and that's it. The larger mid-size, what used to be large caps, which are now mid-cap companies like Teledyne, Deckers, Inogen is kind of creeping in there, Trade Desk. Those don't get coverage anywhere, and so we become the default, and it's a fairly big responsibility for us to cover those middle and larger small cap publicly traded companies. We do still operate a print publishing enterprise, and it's a very valuable enterprise, we think. We think there, over time, particularly as there's more, and it's unfortunate, but particularly as there's more inequality in our society, print has a certain cachet with people who are in a upper middle class demographic for news. It's an experience that you just cannot get online, and we hear from CEOs and CFOs that the power of the experience of learning about the market, unplugging, is really valuable. We publish weekly on Fridays. Your subscription is delivered via mail. It just comes right to your home or place of work. Comes every week. We have 24 special reports that we publish, and at the end of the year, we publish a top 25 book of lists. That's really the best comprehensive business-to-business resource in the region. You can go online, www.pacbiztimes.com, or hand me a business card and we will sign you up. It costs less than $1 a week. I mean, the maximum you could pay for a subscription is $49.99. Come on, people. and we have some discounts, and we can help you out. Just give me a business card, and that's the end of my commercial. I do think I've spent a lot of time thinking about how the market has changed, and at the end, just for bonus, I'll talk about a couple, 3 emerging trends that we see. But in banking, you know, it was a very interesting situation when we started the Business Times. I mean, there were 3 or 4, actually 2, very large locally based market participants, and they basically made the market. They made the market for loans, they made the market for deposit rates, they made the market for most services, and one was based in Arroyo Grande. Mid-State Bank and Trust was about $1.7 billion in assets at the time, and the other was, as you all might guess, Santa Barbara Bank and Trust. It was a very large institution. At one point, it was almost as big as City National, and there was talk about the two possibly merging. It was a pretty powerful institution, and that was it. That was, and then everything, and there was sort of a hierarchy of banks from there, and then there were a few large, you know, at that time you would call them regional, they were probably bigger than that, banks that were powerful forces in the market, particularly Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo continues to be a pretty powerful institution, but others, B of A, Citigroup, Chase, had somewhat of a presence in the market. If you fast forward to today, it's a completely different landscape. In fact, the number of, and there were about 20 local banks. In Ventura County, because we cover Ventura, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo County. In Ventura County and in San Luis Obispo County, there are no locally based banks. The largest and pretty much the only institutions are credit unions, and CESLOC in San Luis and Ventura County Credit Union are the 2 largest and pretty much the only locally based financial institutions there. In Santa Barbara County, the 2nd largest financial institution is a credit union, Coast Hills, formerly Vandenberg. And when it comes to commercial banks, we're down to what we call the final 4. So Montecito Bank and Trust, which has emerged to be almost as big as Midstate was back in the day, is the largest. It's still privately owned, and Janet Rufus, the chair and CEO, is going to be our Distinguished Achievement Award winner for our inaugural new award at Top 50 Women in Business tonight. But So there's Montecito. There are two kind of medium-sized banks, American Riviera and Community West. Community West used to be called Goleta National. And then a fourth bank is a small business bank up in Santa Maria and Lompoc called Community Bank of Santa Maria. It's technically publicly traded, but it's really controlled by a small group. That's it. You know, to replace Midstate and Santa Barbara Bank and Trust have come what we call kind of the regional 4 or 5. These are banks that are still based in California. They're just not based here. And they are kind of filling in that middle market. Citizens Business Bank, which is a unique bank in many ways, that survived the recession in really good shape. So you have Citizens, Pacific Premier, Pacific Western, Bank of the Sierra, which has made a bargain basement series of acquisitions and built a Central Coast network. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll think of the fifth in a minute. Pacific Premier, Pac Western, Bank of Sierra, Citizens, and, well, you could throw into the mix Farmers and Merchants, which is in the process of building out the old Midstate headquarters. That's another bank based in Long Beach, family owned. So that's really a big, pardon? Umpqua is actually based in Oregon, so they don't.
They bought a few little places.
They've, and then there are other banks have kind of moved in. Umpqua, there's another bank out of Missouri that very cleverly buys up local banks but leaves the local name intact, and they bought Founders Community Bank in St. Louis. So, but the Final Four and the Regional 5, and you know, the next wave may be some consolidation among those regionals. We're just not sure. Well, a couple things happened to get us there. One, obviously, is the Great Recession, which put banks under tremendous pressure if they didn't have really good knowledge of their credit quality and depositors who were loyal. And in the case of Pacific Capital or Santa Barbara Bank Trust, it was those loyal depositors that really saved that bank because we were watching very, very closely. I have a lot of experience with bank failures because back in the day, well, how much time do I have? The guy who really taught me about banking was a Syrian refugee from Aleppo named Marwan Jabri that I worked with at my first newspaper in Springfield, Massachusetts. And in the 1950s, his father, who was a wealthy merchant, had actually been the central bank for the country of Syria when they were between governments and they didn't have a central bank president. And he just said, well, I'll guarantee all the foreign exchange for a few months to help you guys out. I don't know what he got in exchange, but it was probably a pretty good deal for him. Marwan emigrated to the U.S. And because his apartment was blown up in Beirut back in the 1960s. And so you can see that the roots of this tragedy in Syria that we're seeing goes way, way, way back. And it's really unfortunate. I think about Marwan, who's no longer with us, a lot these days. But Marwan taught me a lot about banking and bank capital and how banks work. And when I got to Denver in 1985, we had a recession and then the savings and loan crisis. And I learned even more about banks and banking. And so we were watching banks, many of the smaller banks, particularly in San Luis Obispo, they didn't have the capital or the depositors, and they just went poof. Santa Barbara Bank and Trust really was running low on capital, but their deposits were very loyal. And you have no idea how much that helped them. 7 or 8 years later, I even talked to some Federal Reserve officials who were sort of amazed and very pleased because Santa Barbara Bank and Trust held on long enough to attract a a $500 million capital injection from two gentlemen from Texas. They did a great job of analyzing the loan portfolio, writing it down, reinventing the bank, and then they exited with a terrific sale to Union Bank, who has been a very stable force in the market. You know, it's very interesting. And then Midstate got very lucky. They were bidding, they were thinking about expanding. If they had done that deal, they would have been crushed by the recession. But instead, they ran up against a big Dutch bank called Rabobank that was also bidding for the same bank. And it was love at first sight, and Midstate sold for a tremendous number, $870 million. They call them Midstate millionaires. If you do business in Santa Maria and run into somebody, you see a Bentley go by. Okay. One of the things that we also learned about banking is how international it's become. And Union Bank is part of Bank of Tokyo, Mitsubishi MUFG. Rabobank, it turns out, okay, quiz, audience participation. The United States is the #1, I'll give you the first half. The United States is the #1 agricultural exporter in the world. What country is #2? What? Yeah, you got it. I kind of gave it away. I gave you a little bit. Right, so the Netherlands is the #2 ag exporter in the world. And one reason why is that they have the best financing vehicle for agricultural exports, and that's a bank called Rabobank, which, as we all know, bought Midstate Bank and Trust and has rebranded itself around sort of supporting local communities and then agribusiness lending. Moving on to tech. You know, the tech world, when I started the Business Times back in 2000, technology was a pretty nascent thing, and people thought, oh, gee, you know, we can all register domain names, think of clever ones, sell them, and make money. And that, you know, we all know how that worked out. But in fact, in the last 5 years, I would say, we've seen a big revolution in tech happening in our marketplace. It comes about, a very smart guy from UC Santa Barbara sort of explained this to me. And it comes about through some very clever decision making at Isla Vista back in the early 1990s, and also the accident of geography and weather, but the two are kind of interrelated. So back in the early 1990s, a guy named the Dean of Engineering at UC Santa Barbara, Venki, Finn or Norwegian, had a bit of a retreat with his team, and he said, what are we going to do to attract talent? And what they decided was that Stanford and Berkeley and the Bay Area universities were going to own silicon-based chip technology. But they thought there are some technologies that are not silicon-based. They're called hybrid or compound semiconductors. And they looked at their expertise and they said, we think we can do very well in this space and in associated technologies. And they went out looking for the best people in those fields. And in our world, a lot of the sensor companies, the solid state LED lighting that we're doing, some of the stuff that is happening in the thin film solar, even Apeel Sciences, which is not a semiconductor company, but it's a material, an advanced material, all come out of that kind of initiative. And so Venki created this core of technology and expertise, and a few companies got spun off. Down in Thousand Oaks, there's a company called Teledyne that's actually run by Venki's successor, Bob Morabian. And they do a lot in advanced chips. And it works for a lot of things, space defense, undersea exploration, infrared, all over the place. So that's one thread. The second thread is software. And software, you can sort of trace it all back to Pam Lopker, kind of a geeky UCSB grad, writing code for enterprise software for this shoe company called Deckers. But it's gotten well beyond that, and we've seen many, many transactions. You could argue, in that cluster was our first unicorn, lynda.com, which developed training for the internet. It wasn't exactly a software company, but if you think of the videos she was producing as a kind of software, or at least helping teach people about software, which was another aspect of it, then she kind of fits in. And just this past week, we've had a couple of transactions in software that are pretty interesting. Yardi Systems kind of came out of nowhere. And I could talk about that for a second or two. So Yardi Systems was created by a guy named Anant Yardi. He's a member of our Business Hall of Fame, who lost his job in a defense factory plant. It wasn't a factory, he was an engineer. And he had a couple rental properties, and he said, I wonder if I can just take some spare time and build some code to manage my rental properties. And today, Yardi is headed toward $1 billion in revenue, and its software runs the biggest buildings in the world. On Tuesday, they said that they had bought a second company in the co-working area, because it turns out their large commercial property owner customers are turning their commercial buildings, parts of them, into co-working spaces. And even large apartment owners, we don't have any big apartment blocks here, but in metropolitan areas, apartment landlords are thinking about my lobby, maybe some vacant storage space, maybe some underutilized, workout room or closet or something, and can I turn it into a co-working space, rent it out by the day, or sell memberships to to tenants who are already overpaying me for their apartments. I can sell them more stuff. So Yardi has made 2 acquisitions in that space in the last 6 months. The one announced this week is in Stirling, Scotland. The first one didn't get as much attention as we might have given it, but the second one certainly got a lot of attention from us. The second acquisition was actually a sale. Logic Monitor was sold again. Just 2 years ago, they sold a big chunk of the company to Providence Equity Partners. Now there's a new group out of Austin, Texas called Vista. We still don't know whether that was a great exit for Providence or a get out even or what, but I suspect it was a pretty good exit for Providence. And the new company, Vista, is a very dynamic company that has built a suite of companies. Logic in that space, Logic Monitor, try to explain it. Their software helps very large companies like Cisco and others help their customers understand what's happening to their data centers and devices. It's not necessarily a cybersecurity company, although I suspect there are some pretty good cyber aspects to their product, but it's really a connectivity, monitoring, making sure everything is working the way it should be working company. And they, like so many others, have this subscription recurring revenue model. And when you think that there are going to be 20 billion new devices sold in the next 3 or 4 years, get $1 for each device once a year. That's a lot of money. And they're pretty opaque at this point, but at some point, I think we'll find out a lot more about where they are. They got about 120, 150 people, and they just recently consolidated offices. As to the future, one thing that we definitely are paying attention to is this marijuana business. It's a lifeline for some of the smaller cities that are really hurting for revenue, and it should be a very interesting experiment. Port Hueneme has the first marijuana retail store. It's actually up and running. Interestingly, the county governments have shown very little interest in it, but Lompoc has a couple of strong advocates for cannabis retail on their city council, so we'll see how that goes. What is it? Grover Beach is also looking at marijuana. One of the things that's interesting is the politics. So some of the up-and-coming millennial city council folks who are winning elections, the next generation of, Salute Carbajal's or Helene Schneider's, Das Williams, because they're getting up there, are much more pro-cannabis, and we'll have to see that as a political trend. Another thing that we're watching very closely is agriculture and agribusiness. The Trump tariffs, definitely the Chinese retaliated, suggesting they were going to put a tariff on our wine exports. Wine exports to China are not a big deal now, but a lot of our growers look at China as the next big thing. So there's some concern there. And in general, we like agribusiness as a sector. We think it's really, one of those things that stood the test of time. And as we think about locally sourcing our food, as we think about how we want our land used, as we think about the fact that those lemon and orange trees in Goleta and Santa Paula are actually absorbing carbon monoxide, agriculture becomes a very interesting kind of space. And even some of the forward thinkers at UC Santa Barbara are starting to think about, hey, could we make trees grow faster, absorb more carbon? Could we create tree, literally carbon sinks around the world and figure out global warming that way? It's a very interesting dynamic time. I think one of the things that we've seen, just kind of come full circle back to UC Santa Barbara, is when you make the tremendous gains we've had in energy efficiency have really made things like lighting, other things use a lot less electricity. So you could see there's a lot of potential for agriculture to displace some of the, it's not gonna, you can't put a tree farm next to a coal plant and get a lot of carbon reduction. But as our economy changes, the potential to use agriculture as an offset gets better and better and better. So anyway, I think I've run out of things to say for this morning, but maybe you all have some questions, so happy to answer a few questions. Do we have time?
We do.
I'm curious to know, a small news organization, how do you actually, you can't be everywhere, so where do your stories come from, and who's out in the field doing the reporting? Well, we get out quite a bit. We certainly use all the tools in the journalist's toolkit. So we are talking to people on the phone. We try to get to the most significant meetings and conferences that take place where we can interact with folks. It turns out that in each community, there are places where people gather and exchange ideas and information. And if you're there, you participate in that. And then there's the stuff that just, there's a lot of email, as we all deal with, and then there's the stuff that just, arrives in the dead of night in an envelope stuck under your door. And that's kind of interesting too. All right. Mike?
Okay, so the Diablo nuclear plant is going to be decommissioned, and how is that going to impact San Luis Obispo with tax revenues and changes in that community?
That's a great question.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, so a question, the first question about how do we get our stories, this question was about Diablo Canyon. That's probably that's a great topic, and I could do a whole talk on that. But as you all know, Diablo Canyon is the last nuclear plant on the West Coast, and the last nuclear power plant, I think, certainly in California, and maybe one of the last in the western United States. It was supposed to sunset in 2025, and before the Fukushima disaster in Japan, PG&E and was talking closely with the regulators about just extending it for another 25 years. And so it came as a big surprise when a year or two ago, PG&E said no. They reached an agreement with most of the environmental groups to sunset the plant in 2025 when its current license runs out. There will be some impact on both San Luis Obispo and northern Santa Barbara counties because about a third of the 2,500 or so workers live in North Santa Barbara County. And 2/3 live in San Luis Obispo County. And right now there's a pretty big fight about, number one, there are some payments that PG&E makes to local school districts in San Luis Obispo to offset the impact of sending those kids to school, plant workers to school. It's in community mitigation costs. There's a big fight in the legislature and among the regulators about whether there will be some transition payments or not. The PUC has said no to ratepayers subsidizing that. Senator Monning and Representative Cunningham have a bill that orders the PUC to make those payments. It's about $85 million. Others of us, this is one of those glass half full, glass half empty things, because those workers who are being laid off have a lot of skills, and they could theoretically become the next generation of entrepreneurs. They could set up businesses. They could work in fields like Vandenberg, because many of them have security clearances and things like skills that could be redeployed. That's a great educational opportunity. And there's kind of a large buffer area around the plant now. And if you actually were able to solve the problem of removing the fuel, the spent fuel, which is currently stored on site, you could really have quite a bit of land for redevelopment. The plant site itself is never going to be developable. It will become a park or be closed off permanently to the public. But the other areas around it, I mean, there's thousands, tens of thousands of acres that are potentially developable or potentially a terrific natural resource for the community. So Diablo Canyon is a big deal. That's a great question.
I have a question on commercial real estate in downtown, the changing landscape, the vacancies. I'm hearing there's a lot of talk about mixed use, live, work, kind of areas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the question is downtown Santa Barbara. Downtown Santa Barbara is a wreck. I mean, we have a lot of empty storefronts, all the things that are, it's another topic, but the part of the problem is without housing and without middle-class families, as this inequality grows in our communities, particularly in Santa Barbara, people who commute in here to work, which is half of my team and probably half of yours, are setting up their lives someplace else. So whether it's Santa Maria or Ventura or Ojai or Oxnard, that's where their lives are, and that's where they're going out to dinner and shopping and buying their clothes. And so the State Street retail has been hollowed out, and when you look at Montecito, even post-flood, which has a different kind of demographic, it's doing okay. And so, ultimately, the solution for downtown Santa Barbara is going to be, and they're not things that are politically popular, and so I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but eventually it's going to be either more housing or some combination of more housing so people can live and work in one location and repopulate those restaurants that have just been devastated. The retail is just not going to come back. And then, you know, you're going to see, I don't know, you name it, people like Amazon, Google, maybe Sonos. Got to give a plug for Sonos because John McFarland, the founder, is going to be inducted into our Business Hall of Fame on May 17th. And he's a great guy. And maybe at Sonos takes that Macy's building over, or Amazon, and repurposes it with, you know, a few hundred people with tech expertise who then need places to live, work, sleep, and maybe most of them live in Ventura. I don't, you know, it's a complicated situation with a long-run solution. I think one of the problems for Santa Barbara right now is that there really isn't a meeting of the minds among the politicians, the voters, business people, entrepreneurs about what that solution looks like. The one person who had a vision, who we don't endorse, but one person whose ideas were sort of interesting and who had found, I think, a way to talk about it was Angel Martinez, another Business Times Hall of Fame member who made a run for mayor. But again, you can see how fractious our politics are. I would say, finally, I'm sort of an optimist, and I think you can always, Winston Churchill said this about the United States of America, you can always count on Santa Barbara to do the right thing after it's exhausted all the alternatives. So after we've been overrun by homeless, devastated in retail, vacant restaurants, blah, 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 you know, somebody will come along and say, oh, gee, I think we need housing, and they'll, take credit for it.
So I'm sure in your position you'd agree, right, that our economy, not just in Santa Barbara, but nationally, is really driven by small business and entrepreneurial-minded people, right? It's really where the heart of what we are is. What kind of tools would you think that entrepreneurs, small business owners need, right, within our community? And how can we advance the things that we're doing in that part of the economic structure?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that could be better. For all of the talk and success of small businesses in Santa Barbara, we still outsource our kind of core small business support to Ventura County, which runs our Small Business Development Center. We've never really put together the tools to have a strong SBDC in Santa Barbara. Marcia Bailey at Weave has a great outfit, but it's still Ventura County that runs our SBDC, which is somewhat connected to the City College. So there are some pipes and plumbing tools that would really be helpful. Secondly, access to capital, without those big locally based banks, I think the community banks and even the large banks do what they can, but we're definitely somewhat capital constrained, and although it probably gives too much freedom to the bigger institutions, some of the changes that are taking place in banking regulation for small business will probably be helpful to us. I think, there is a debate now in academic circles about whether it's really small business that runs the economy or whether it's the small businesses that become giant businesses like Facebook or LinkedIn / lynda.com, Sonos, that really drive most of the job growth. And that's a debate, and there's no easy answer to it. But when you think about growing very large companies, the one component that's kind of missing around here is a kind of a steady flow of venture capital. We have a lot of aspects of our tech infrastructure that are pretty strong. IP lawyers are pretty good. You can take a company public or with a little bit of outside help on accounting, but
You can certainly do just about everything you need to do here. You can import talent from LA, but we've never had that sort of embedded group of venture capitalists with, 50 to 100 to 500 million, pool. The Vista, the company that bought Logic Monitor, has its principal headquarters in Austin, Texas, and they have funded 31 billion with a B in tech deals over the last 10, 15 years. And our venture capital, private equity folks just aren't that big. So those are some of the things you might think about.
So Deckers went through a challenge with the shareholders, a hostile takeover that kind of quieted down. Is that behind them, or is that still lurking in the background as a risk, potentially moving the company? All kinds of things we're talking about.
Well, when you have a publicly traded company, you're sort of at risk every day. But I think they're pretty much, they've beat back their big challenge. And I think when you get that sort of an endorsement, I don't know. Personally, I think the hedge fund guys and the private equity guys look for things that are easy, and once you sort of, beat them back, it takes a while. Until there's another cycle or some externality that really hits Deckers hard, I think their management has a fair amount of room now to kind of turn things around. The interesting thing about Deckers is they've never really lost money, right? They've been pretty profitable all the way through this. So there is a cyclical aspect to their business, and it looks like they're getting on the other side of it. Their biggest problem was they got to be on the Jim Cramer, Fast Five companies, and every night you'd watch CNBC and he'd be talking about it, and it's like, oh my God, this is the kiss of death, because some vulture capitalist is going to come on, try and knock them off. Same thing has happened to Under Armour, if you've been watching them. So, all right, anything else? Thank you all very much.
Real quick, thanks for being here this morning. I'm Paul with Anchor Point, and next month will be our kind of final deal before the summer where we'll take a break. And we've got a great story. The CEO of Mighty Bright is going to talk about his experience when his office and warehouse burned down, and the lessons that he learned from an insurance perspective, from a disaster recovery perspective, and everything in between. I guarantee you all of us will learn something from it. I know that we did, being involved closely with it. So hopefully you'll be here. It'll be, I think it's May 19th. Does that sound right? I'll confirm that right now. It is May 17th.
May
So,
17th.
May 17th, same place, same time. Thanks for being here, you guys.
Great.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank you.